For player profiles, in-depth features and exclusive interviews, visit sfhandbook.com to learn more about the best young football players in the world. Hello and welcome to this week's instalment of the Scouted Football Podcast. We're off to Spain for this one to recap what's been happening in La Liga at the beginning of this season through that under-23 lens as per usual. For that reason, we've got David Cartlidge back with us, Scouted's go-to guy when it concerns anything Spanish football. Never shy to share his honest opinions about players, managers and the like, which is always good. It should also be said, if you go way back in the Scouted podcast archives, it was Dave who initially drew our attention to Pedri 2 years ago this week, in fact, which seems like a very long time ago. That is on episode 6, if you want to hear the infancy of the Scouted Football podcast. But first off, though, Dave, how are things your end?
I'm doing well, man. It's nice to be back. I think last time we chatted, we were potentially mid-lockdown number 2 or 3. I can't remember. So yeah, it's nice to be back on the podcast and neither of us in lockdown.
Yeah, definitely. It was the Valencia episode, wasn't it, where we last chatted? That was a good one, very intriguing. We've got another sort of La Liga case study involved in this episode, but we thought, given that it's been quite a while since we've last chatted, then it'd be good to do sort of a La Liga focus type episode and bring people up to speed on what's been happening. But, what has been happening in La Liga? You've got Real Madrid. They appear quite fun to the naked eye. The 32 goals have been scored in their 8 matches, which is the highest of any club by some margin in La Liga this season. The unravelling of Barcelona seems to continue in some sort of very slow pantomime. And we've also got some surprise packages in sort of Osasuna and Rayo Vallecano, both starting the season very strongly with 5 wins apiece. And at the bottom of the table, Getafe suffering a bit of a post-Bordalas hangover with no wins and 7 defeats in their opening 9 games. But I mean, just generally, how has the beginning of the La Liga season been for you, David?
Yeah, this one was always going to be extremely interesting because I guess the main thing over the summer was Messi leaving, of course, and Real Madrid, they didn't land Mbappe, so they didn't land the superstar sort of thing. So the Liga was put itself in an intriguing position, I think, at the start of the season, with no main star. And don't get me wrong, Karim Benzema is wonderful, and he's very much, he's about the face of La Liga right now. But there was no, that big superstar, that they sold their league on, and that was always going to be interesting. And yeah, I think you've got a lot of teams just kind of figuring out still who they are, what they're going to be about. And then you've kind of probably got Atleti and Villarreal who are in a position of familiarity, consistency under the regimes that they had before, and are looking to build on that. So yeah, it was always going to be a really, really intriguing one, I think, to see how things start.
Yeah, before we get into today's case study, and that is Villareal, as you just touched on there, I would like to just discuss who some of the players that have come to the fore at the beginning of this season have been, because I think the big one that most people who are plugged into sort of the under-23 sphere they'll be aware of is Gavi, who's obviously come through at Barcelona and is now, I mean, he's playing a reasonable amount of minutes in that first team under Ronald Koeman, and I think it's one which definitely took a lot of people by surprise. But you've also got the likes of, Vinicius Jr., who obviously has been around for some time, but is now sort of becoming a protagonist at Real Madrid alongside Karim Benzema, as you mentioned. Another one similar to Vinicius, Unai Vencedor at the Athletic Club, who has been, he played around 28, 29, roughly that sort of many games last season, but this year has by my estimations, started very well. And there's also a Villarreal player in there as well, Yeremi Pino, who was recently called up to the Spain squad as well. But I mean, just from your perspective, and I'm sure it's a bit more honed than mine, who has been sort of maybe a standout under 23 who perhaps wasn't a household name beforehand in Spain?
Yeah, it is. It's really, really difficult to go away from Gavi. He's been that sensational. I think he's captured everybody's. I think the fact that he had those UEFA Nations League games with Spain, it brought him under a wider gaze. He became kind of a household name, so people know who he is now. I think during the Euros they found out about Pedri in terms of the next young Spanish star, and then they've been throwing Gavi as well straight away. And I thought Yeremi Pino, who we'll get on to discussing, also made an interesting impression. A few people said to me the next day, "Oh yeah, I know that talks about Gavi, but Yeremi Pino looked pretty good as well." And I was like, "Yeah, it is. It's an interesting one with him." So, and then I think if you look at the others, I think if you look at Vinicius Junior, he had a lot of criticism when he first came to Real Madrid, and I think people were just a bit, they over they thought he was too raw and such, but he was always going to be very very raw. And but now I think you kind of like see him recognizing what his game is now and understanding things a bit more in terms of Real Madrid and how they play, what's expected of him. I think, and he's just generally improved as well. And so I think he's been standout as well. So I think those three have been excellent. You've got Luis Maximiano as well down, and again another exciting young goalkeeper that's come to Granada. Of course, they had Rui Silva, previously Portuguese Rui Silva, who went to Real Betis as well. So he's one to watch as well, and he's going to get plenty of action in that Granada goal as well when he's there. So yeah, there are some interesting young players now, I think, around, and I think the way that the squads are as well, in terms of what the league is going through, in terms of they can't buy too many big stars and such, it is giving a few more chances to younger players.
I suppose that brings us on nicely then onto the today's case study, and that's Villarreal, as you were touching on Yeremi Pino there, and we'll go into in greater depth on him in a little while. But it was actually quite typical, because when we were initially in the planning phases of this episode, Villarreal was still unbeaten, which obviously made them quite a good topic to discuss. But they were defeated this past weekend, just gone, 2-1 by Osasuna. Jimmy Avila getting a goal after 21 months out injured. I think that was that was a particularly poignant moment for Osasuna, and especially for Chimi himself. But Villarreal have they previously were they were the last unbeaten side in La Liga this season, but they're 12th, which might not tally with where people might have put them at the beginning of the season. 2 wins, 5 draws, and now that 1 defeat for them, but just the 5 goals conceded under Unai Emery. So I mean, I guess, the question I want to know is, how is Emery sort of readapting to life in Spain, post the PSG debacle, post the Arsenal debacle would have been too strong for that, but how it perhaps didn't pan out in the way that it was initially intended. What I feel like from sort of an Anglo-centric perspective on how I consume football news, I feel like his reputation definitely took a dent in this country, but I feel like that's not been the case with him at Villarreal.
I mean, he reacted in the best way possible by bringing the trophy to them. He got that Europa League, of course, last season, which was massive for him, I think, and it's what Villarreal really, really wanted, in terms of honours. And they're still a very young club in the grand scheme of things, Villarreal. So that was the ideal way for Emery, I think, to rebound after Arsenal and what happened there, I think. And we now see them kind of in that next stage where I think there's a bit more pressure there. I think there's a bit more expectation. They've spent quite a bit of money. If you look at the players that they've brought in, and the amount that they have brought in, especially when, like I hinted at before, that the market is quite stale in Spain in terms of players coming in and big money being spent. Villarreal kind of have booked the trend the last few years, and they've brought several players in, and they brought Dani Parejo in to kind of control their midfield as such. They brought him, and they brought Coquelin as well from Valencia, and took advantage of their situation there. Pervis Estupiñán, who was excellent, of course, at Osasuna. Somebody we previewed in one of the Scout Football handbooks as well. They brought him in, and then obviously this summer Danjuma came in as well for big money. And I always said I thought Danjuma would have been somebody going to a Premier League club. I thought he just made ideal sense for a lot of teams there as well. So yeah, it's interesting to see how they are acclimatizing, and I think there is a lot of pressure on Emery. And there's always been the criticism of Emery. It even existed when I was at Sevilla as well, that he sometimes only could concentrate on one cup as opposed to battle on all fronts. And you can already just slightly see it now that they're starting to tail off a little bit in the league. They've only won twice this season after 8 games, which I think is really, really disappointing for a club who've spent that amount of money that they have. So their form has got to turn around rapidly. Otherwise, I think a lot of questions will be asked. Emery can't keep drawing games. They've drawn 5 of their 8 games, and that's just really, really disappointing, I think. And that's why the criticisms will always exist of Emery. Even if he wins a trophy, there are always going to be the criticisms there, because sometimes he can revert to those old defensive stylings, get a little bit negative, get a bit too pragmatic and such. And all those hallmarks have very much been there.
Yeah, I think they were some of the concerns that Arsenal supporters had at the time when he was managing them as well. That it became a bit stagnant at times. It became a bit
Yeah.
stale, and there is the worry that when you revert to type as a manager, then your teams then reflect sort of how you wanted to set up, and that's not always helpful, especially in this case. But I suppose from an under 23 perspective, obviously he has pedigree with developing players and having worked with some of the game's up and coming best players when he was at Sevilla and the like. But just with the squad that Villarreal have, it does have quite a young feel to it. And last season there was Fernando Nino, who's out on loan this year, but also Yeremi Pino, who came through. Obviously, just touched on him, and I think it would be good to get into who he is as a player. What he's like, what he brings to the attack. Why. I mean, fundamentally, why Luis Enrique called him up to the Spain squad, because that is kind of the biggest endorsement that you can give for a player so young. But yeah, I'm just curious to know more about Pino, to know more about the dynamic of him working under a coach like Emery and in a team which is, as you say, it's a young club, it's a young squad in certain places with Villarreal as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's the ideal system for him. I don't think it's the ideal time to be at Villarreal for him in terms of the style that he has. I think it suits more. I think it suits Danjuma way better. Somebody who relies a lot more to play on the break, that can use his pace on the break, and so that works much better for an Emery team as opposed to somebody like Yeremi Pino, who's, don't get me wrong, he's got a bit of speed, but it's not what his game is about. His game is about more careful technical aspects, threading little passes through, playing just off the strike force. And the thing that's always struck me about him, I always think he would have really suited being in an old Villarreal team, a Pellegrini Villarreal type team, where it was more technical and where it relied on those kind of South American midfielders and such. And I always think Yeremi Pino would have fitted in there, and even later on as well. He would have fitted in a Calleja side as well, even when they had Santi Cazorla there as well, and I think that would have worked even better for him as well. And he looks very much a Villarreal type player when you think of those players that have been there down the years. But at the moment, it's a little bit difficult for him to really fully express himself. Don't get me wrong, he's got 3 assists so far, and a goal as well. But there's still, I think, a lot more to come from him. He's going to sign a new contract. The news this week, funnily enough, has been he's got a new contract offer on the table. So he's probably going to sign a new deal there, and he's going to be staying there for the next few years. Ideal time. I think it's ideal for him to stay there, even if Emery isn't the best coach. He will get some good coaching, perhaps not like the one that will kind of unleash him fully, but I think it's good for his development still. He's only 18, only just come into the team. I think he's going to have more of a role to play. Danny Parejo doesn't look as fit as he used to be. I don't think he's going to play as many minutes. So there's going to be a bit more of a reliance on Pino to be the creative spark, I think. So it could play into his hands quite well as the season develops.
Yeah, I mentioned that obviously there are elements or there are aspects of this Villarreal team who are quite young, but there are also, there's a vast amount of experience in there as well. Etienne Capoue, Danny Parejo, as you mentioned, Raul Albiol. There are some seasoned pros, some really seasoned internationals in there who, you can hope that even if the coaching element isn't, to the, isn't going to maximize Pino's development at this moment in time, that there's going to be some real solid heads in there to be able to offer him some words of advice, to be able to maybe coach him through games while he's on the pitch, and as well in terms of working with 2 centre forwards who are very adept at scoring goals in Paco Alcácer and Gerard Moreno. There are, as I say, elements to this squad which you say that it's beneficial for a player to be playing in this team
Yeah.
with those sort of chess pieces around him. But I do agree with what you're saying in terms of him being a more technical player, whereas
Mhm.
Danjuma is somebody who definitely thrives a lot more in transition.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, and to be honest, I don't mind the attack not being as balanced because I mean, Pino, as you mentioned, 18 years old, still very much getting to grips with La Liga, to getting into grips with senior football. Danjuma, obviously coming in from Bournemouth this summer, he's obviously a new signing. Gerard Moreno hasn't been the centre forward this season as he was last year due to, for whatever reasons. So it's not. I wouldn't say that there's it's the end of the world. These players are going to gel, or at least you'd hope that
Mhm.
they're going to gel a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in time they will, and I think you'll see a bit more from Villarreal as the season goes on, and I think each player kind of like nails down their role. We'll get into him in a minute as well, but Samuel Chukwueze has just come back as well. He's been out since May with injury, and he's only just come back into the team now as well. So he's another kind of player that you'd look at and think it'd be interesting to see his role. I think the potential of him, Danjuma, and Jared Moreno all together is really, really exciting. And with Yeremi Pino just behind them as well, it could change a lot of things. Because, I mean, at the moment, Villarreal aren't even in the top five teams when it comes to shots per game as well. So they're not shooting much either. The Real Madrid, Betis, Sevilla, Real Sociedad, and Atletico Madrid are all ahead of them as well. This is despite Villarreal having a decent amount of possession. They've had over 57%, which is the third most, but they're not generating, the shots per game that justifies that possession what they have.
Yeah, I mean, let's get on to Chukwueze now because I mean
Mm.
he's a name which I always seem to bring up whenever we do these La Liga episodes because I was just so captivated by him when he first broke through at Villarreal, and I mean he's closing in on sort of around 100 league games for Villarreal, and that's quite astonishing when you look that he was born in 1999. He's still 22 years old, and
Yeah,
obviously he's had his fair share of spells out the side, spells of bad form, injuries. So I'm just curious to know from your perspective, where do you put Chukwueze in terms of his development? Like, how is he getting back into this team with Pino on the right and Danjuma on the left, and how is he going to have to adapt and maybe to try and force his way back into the manager's thoughts?
yeah, exactly. I think just before he got injured, I thought he was just stagnating a little bit. He could have been more of a bit of a frustrated figure. And again, it goes back to what we've just discussed. I didn't really get the impression that he was an Emery in style, a player on the transition. He's very much an Emery player, but I think he's too expressive for an Emery type side. I think he needs to be a bit more regimented, and he needs to work on his tracking back and such for Emery to really fall in love with him and make him a key part of the team. I think it might be a while before he even becomes a regular in the team. I think he's going to be very much slowly ease back into the side right now. And also Danjuma is playing brilliant as well. And I'm unsure whether Emery will want to go straight away with them both in the team. He's going to want to weigh that up, I think. But he's still so young. And there's still a lot more to come from him. But yeah, I did feel he was just stagnating a little bit. He didn't really have the breakout that I expected him to when just before the injury. And he has been set back, obviously. So you just got to take his time to come back in. And who knows, maybe the second half of the season is perfectly set back up for him once he works back to full match fitness and such.
Yeah, I think there's also the potential that for as much as we're bigging up Yeremi Pino here, that he's still Pino still being 18 years old. You have to accept that there'll be a level of variance in his performances as well, won't there? There will be spells where he just maybe isn't at it at the same level that's required, and obviously we hope that's not the case, but it's something which is a reality for 17, 18, 19-year-old players, especially in
Yeah.
a position which is maybe not completely catered to his natural strengths as we've already discussed. So I think there will be opportunities to see Chukwueze this season, sort of from my perspective, and I hope we do because he's somebody who in the right team with the right coaching structure with the right style is somebody who absolutely can thrive because of that individuality, because of that flair, as you mentioned, Dave. But I mean, we've spoken quite a lot about the wingers, and that's mainly because they're 24 and under. Danjuma is a bit a bit older than the scouted threshold, but I mean, we've got to discuss him. It's 4 goals in 6 appearances so far this season in La Liga, I think. I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, his introduction to La Liga has been excellent, hasn't it? I mean, he's at 24 years old, it's still quite an interesting career path he's taken. Came through at PSV, but didn't really get the opportunity there. Went out to NEC Nijmegen in the Netherlands, with native Netherlands. Then to Club Brugge, but then some people may have seen Club Brugge to Bournemouth as maybe a step down, but it's effectively acted as a trampoline. It's used he's used the Cherries as a platform, essentially, to bring himself up to a club of Villarreal's stature. A team who are competing regularly in Europe and winning, winning honours, essentially. So I think it's a good news story for Danjuma, that throughout his developmental years he's got to a point where he's now playing regularly and playing well for a team, even if the style that is being played isn't fully catering to his strengths either. So it's I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say I've been caught by surprise, because, as you said, I thought Danjuma would have been a great pick for quite a few Premier League clubs. Those who as I mentioned earlier, who play on the counter or in transition. He's got that. He's just so confident when it comes to finishing, and having that as a wide forward is such a string to your bow, that you can go inside and you can when the fullback or the wide centre half tries to face up to you, you don't know which way he's going to go, because he's going to be equally good on either side. I think with Danjuma's early signs in La Liga is that I think the league is suited to him perhaps better than maybe other competitions would be. But yeah, it's been positive so far, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really, really has. Villarreal, put it this way, Villarreal scored 9 goals this season, and he scored 4 of them. I mean, that just goes to show how already how much of an impact he has made and how key he actually is. And yeah, don't get me wrong, Villarreal was a great move for him. The Liga, brilliant league, I think, for his style. Players like him can really have a lot of fun, and really open up more slower technical games, and he can use his attributes to his advantage incredibly so. I think at one point I thought, if Ivan Toney actually leaves Brentford, maybe Brentford would bring in Danjuma as his replacement. That was kind of what that's what I was looking at. I was thinking that might be somewhere they go. And he's been fantastic for Villarreal. He's even outshone Gerard Moreno, the excellent Gerard Moreno. And he looks very, very settled. And Emery's really liking using him and what he brings and how explosive he can be as well. I'm really impressed, and it wouldn't be surprised. I'm not going to be surprised at all if teams start, just looking at him in the Premier League, if they've got a little bit of money, looking at him, thinking, all right, do we maybe pay double what Villarreal paid for him, pay 40, 50 million, and what that probably isn't that much money these days, and he might be an ideal buy for somebody. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if clubs are already looking at him again.
Yeah, I mean, he was 25 million euros around that figure. I mean, you've got to think. I mean, that's a bog standard sort of transfer fee for Premier League clubs nowadays, isn't it? So, I mean, kudos to Villarreal scouting, because obviously it's not ordinary that you'd see a club who win the Europa League to dip into the English Championship and say, actually, you know what, this is the player who we want. And they've went and got him, and I'm sure there will have been Premier League interest, but ultimately it's Villarreal who pulled the trigger, and it's a case of Premier League sides missing out, unfortunately for them. And speaking of Premier League sides missing out, the player on the right side of Villarreal's defence this season, or predominantly this season, has been Juan Foyth, who's obviously the Argentine international who was at Spurs under Jose Mourinho, but ultimately just, I don't know what it was. Face didn't fit. Maybe just didn't impress Mourinho in the way that he might have hoped. I think there were a few Spurs fans who just wanted to see more of him to get a better gauge of where he was best, because I think in England he was typically seen as more of a right-sided centre half, but this season with Villarreal, he's obviously been playing as a right back, and I'm curious to know from you, Dave, like how I mean, does it appear just, why was he never used as a right back for Spurs? Given how well documented it was, the woes that they had with Serge Aurier.
Yeah, it's remarkable to me. I'd go as far. I mean, first and foremost, before we get on to discussing his position, I'd probably say during Emery's time there, he has been the best player at the club. I would say outside of Gerard Moreno in terms of what he offers. He has been that good. He's been outstanding. He also played as a defensive midfielder for a little time. And it's funny, you said these two other positions that you wouldn't associate with him. Defensive midfielder and as a fullback as well as a right back. And he has been brilliant both times when he has gone into into those roles, and he really hasn't let anyone down at all. And then he's really nailed down this right back slot, and he's been fantastic. He's not looked back since then, and he's been the best player, the most consistent player under Emery at Villarreal. And it happened by chance as well. You've got to say, when you think about it, it was a case of injuries, suspensions, and such, and a lack of form there of other players. He came in, and now he has that. He's the first choice right back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at his numbers here. He was absolutely integral in that Europa League run last season, wasn't he? That's
Yeah.
12 games that he played, so that's pretty much every game in that competition. On top of 16 league appearances and a couple more in the domestic cups as well. So, I mean, talking about Emery maybe not competing on all fronts or not being able to, but Juan Foyth certainly can. But yeah, obviously that move was made permanent this summer. He was initially on loan from Spurs, and at the time I did think, he's been cut a hard deal here. The fact that he maybe hasn't been given a fair whack at starting regularly for Spurs, and now he's showing that he can do it for a Champions League club, which is ironic given that Spurs are no longer in that competition. So it's it'll be interesting to see how the season pans out. But I'm pleased to hear, obviously, from you that you think he's been the best player for them since coming in, because obviously the players that we've discussed before Foyth are obviously the ones which are the headline grabbers, but he's by all accounts been quite steady, and I think that's something that Spurs needed in that position.
He really understands that. Of course, I think Emery made it famous, kind of that double fullback type situation when he did it when he was at Valencia. I remember everybody marvelled at it. In the sense that they played Jordi Alba and Jeremy Mathieu together, and he's been brilliant in that sense. There, he can play as a fullback, and he also gallops up the line as well. But I think first and foremost, and this is always so important for Emery, is that he has just retained that defensive solidity that Emery looks for so much, and he puts defensive actions before attacking actions. But he's been very comfortable on the ball as well. I think that's why Emery likes him as well. A lot of their play comes down that right side, and it very much does start with Foyth. And he's been fantastic. I think it was 15 million the buyout it was to execute the loan to make it permanent. And he's been a bargain for that. He really has. But I always think in the Premiership, the time you get to showcase your ability is very limited. He wouldn't have got a chance to, I think he played defensive midfield in some games for Spurs as well as centre back, but he was never really given a full amount of time to develop, I think, and mistakes get highlighted a bit more. He's obviously a young player as well, so he's seen as naive and such, but he's been very reliable for Villarreal. Hasn't put a foot wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a pressure cooker at times in the Premier League, isn't it?
Yeah.
But time to get on to some season predictions then, and just La Liga in general. Obviously, looking at the table in its current state, you've got Real Sociedad, who at the time of recording are top of the table, but by 3 points below them, you've also got Real Madrid, Sevilla, Atletico Madrid, and Osasuna, all on 17 points. If Real Madrid win their game in hand, even if Sevilla win their game in hand or Atleti win their game in hand, they would go above Real Sociedad on goal difference. But obviously, good start to the season from all those sides. Barcelona currently sat in 7th with Real Betis and Athletic Club below them. Valencia, separating the two halves in 10th, Villarreal, as we mentioned, in 12th. And then we're looking towards the bottom end of the table. The teams without wins so far, you've got Levante and Getafe. Between them, sandwiched in 19th is Alaves, who have won 1 and lost 7. So I think the table is very polarized at the moment. I'm curious to know what your expectations for the end of the campaign will be.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of surprise packages up there. I think Osasuna, Rayo, who are in 5th and 6th respectively. I think they'll eventually drop down. I think they're playing with a lot of energy, intensity right now. They're going out with every game with such a great attitude. I think potentially the demands of the season, their smaller squads will hit them later down the line. So I could see them dropping down a little bit, and then Betis and Athletic Bilbao just coming up. And you'll look at the table, I think, potentially in the new year, and as the last couple of months come down to the season, the usual suspects up there. So it will be very much a case of Real Sociedad, Real Madrid, Sevilla, Atletico Madrid, Barcelona, Athletic Bilbao, Betis, just all around it. And Villarreal, sorry, as well. Villarreal, I think, should pick up as well. But again, like we've touched on there, I think with Emery, he needs to work out. He really does need to be able to compete on all fronts, because you've got to remember that year, that his second year, when he won the Europa League at Sevilla, the second one, he didn't win an away game all year in the league. So that's the kind of thing that happens there sometimes with Emery. So he's got to pick up there, I think, a little bit. I still think the title race will be between Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid. Before the season, in all my kind of predictions and such, I said if anybody's going to challenge outside the usual group, it's going to be Sevilla. I think Real Sociedad are going to get amongst it as well. I think they're going to take advantage of just the kind of the state transition that some of these teams are in. Barcelona are in one, Real Madrid are in one. Sevilla and Atletico Madrid and Real Sociedad really know themselves. They've now had the same manager for a few years. They're very consistent. Look at Sevilla's defensive record. They've conceded 3 goals so far. It's remarkable, really. They are, kind of like a new Atleti in terms of just scraping out results and just getting the job done. They won 1-0 against Celta Vigo away in a game that was just so close. So yeah, I still think it's between Real Madrid and Atleti for the title. I think the other Champions League spots, Sevilla, Real Sociedad, Barcelona, and then Real Betis and Athletic Bilbao and Villarreal will try and get those last Europa League spots.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, the Sevilla this year are kind of where to Atleti, they're like where the new improved you, because they have been, I don't want to say miserly, and that's a word I like to use quite a lot, but they've just been really organised. And I think, we'll probably do an episode on this further down the line about Sevilla, but, when you've got the likes of, Jules Koundé in there, it's going to help you, isn't it? I think what you mentioned about Rayo and Osasuna keeping pace, you do see that in a lot of leagues where you get, some early season bolters who you perhaps are a bit unexpected. But obviously squad size and maybe 1 or 2 key injuries. And this is universal. You see it across loads of leagues. They can just completely throw you off and you lose that momentum, which has been propelling you forward. It'll be interesting to see how Barcelona obviously manage the rest of the season, because it's not looking great. Obviously, after 8-9 games, they're down in 7th. Obviously, only 5 points off the top, but all the sort of the underlying signs maybe not being as complimentary as Ronald Koeman would like.
Yeah.
Obviously, Gavi being a bright spark, but we don't want him to be put through the ringer in the same way that Pedri has over the past 365 days. So hopefully, we'll see some. Maybe a more sensible approach to managing the minutes of a 17-year-old who's playing in one of the most demanding and competitive leagues in world football. But it's probably the bit that you don't want to talk about, because whoever wants to predict who's going to get relegated, but who do you think is going down? Because at the moment it's looking like it's going to be 3 or 4 teams.
Yeah, I said in the summer, once everything happened, or it did, with Getafe, I thought they'd be down there. I didn't think they'd be this bad that after 9 games they wouldn't have a win. I thought they'd maybe have 2, potentially, at least, or 1. But like, for them to have none, and the position, the quality of what they've played it just hasn't been there. They've just been so bad. I was very concerned. I mean, fine, Bordelas was always going to go at some point, okay, but it was a case of how they reacted after that. I just thought they panic bought. They just seemed to buy a lot of players. They didn't focus on the quality that they had done in previous years. Minor tweaks. They bought in too many, and they've really struggled. And I think they're in danger already. I really do. I can see Alaves going down as well, and then I think Levante are in trouble as well, because they had such a good young manager at one point in it, and then they've already let him go as well. I think Celta are down there at the moment. They'll pull out. I think it'll be between Elche, Cadiz, and Granada as well, who have suffered a massive drop off as well, and after losing their coach, their excellent coach as well. So I think they're in trouble. But I'd say a task here. I'd be really surprised if they got out of it, which is incredible considering what they've achieved the past few years, getting into Europe and such, and everybody knowing them under Bartlett. But it really has been a case of once he's gone, then everything has just completely fell apart. They'll probably lose Genya, lose Aaron Barry as well, who's a great talent, and I can't think he's going to stick around there. There might be clubs look at him in January as well. He's the sort. I tell you what, he's the sort of player I'd bring in if I'm Newcastle and I'm looking. If they do end up spending money in January, Aaron Barry is the type of player exactly what I'm looking for. Combative, little type in midfielder. He can play a bit. He can defend. He's very suited, I think, to the Premier League as well.
Organisational.
Yeah. He's the sort of person I'd love to see them get, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there we go. There's some expert predictions for how the La Liga season is going to pan out. Obviously, it's been a whirlwind start to the campaign, but and it's been interesting to see how Villarreal have done as well. I'm sure that some of you who are listening will maybe follow the Villarreal's progress in the coming months, just to see if our predictions and our hypothesis is correct. But that's all from us on the Scouted Football Podcast this week. I've been Joe Donoghue as usual, and I've been joined by David Cartlidge. Thank you very much for tuning in. Stay safe, take care, bye for now. For player profiles, in-depth features and exclusive interviews, visit sfhandbook.com to learn more about the best young football players in the world.